Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. Iran warns Trump they will use thousands of drones and missiles if they attack again. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, all bad news for the U.S. Russia decides to go full throttle and back Iran. They want the end of this nonsense. Let's get into the content. Salute.
What if one country has been quietly preparing for the war that has engulfed the entire West Asia for years? And now, the scale of that preparation is only just beginning to emerge. A senior Russian lawmaker has made a striking claim that Iran may possess tens of thousands of drones and missiles, potentially reshaping the balance of power in the region. According to Alexei Pushkov, senior member of Russia's upper house of parliament, Iran has spent years preparing for a large-scale conflict, not just militarily, but economically and strategically. Speaking to Russian state media TASS, Pushkov said Tehran has fortified its military infrastructure, moving key missile systems underground and dispersing them across the country. The goal? Survival. Pushkov claims Iran now operates a vast and hardened network of missile facilities, many of them buried deep underground, making them extremely difficult to detect or destroy. This comes amid rising tensions between Iran and the United States, tensions that have already spilled into the skies and seas of West Asia. But Pushkov drew a sharp contrast between the two sides. For Iran, he says, this is a, quote, existential war, a fight for survival. For the United States, however, he described it as a, quote, war of choice. That distinction could be critical, because in wars of survival, nations are often willing to go much further and endure much more than in conflicts driven by strategy or politics. Pushkov even suggested that within the United States, criticism is growing over the decision to escalate the conflict with Iran. While these claims cannot be independently verified, they highlight a growing concern among analysts that Iran's military capabilities, especially in drones and missiles, may be far more extensive and resilient than previously understood. And if true, it could complicate any attempt to neutralize those capabilities through conventional military means. Pushkov made the bold claims as Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi arrived in Russia on Monday, where he is expected to meet with President Vladimir Putin and seek his support amid the war with the U.S.
It is a suitable opportunity for us to hold consultations with our Russian friends regarding the developments concerning the war that have occurred during this period and also the current situation, so we can review the latest status together. Oh, and I'm absolutely confident that we will make all the necessary arrangements, which is the most crucial thing in this particular.
Russia and Iran are close strategic allies, but Moscow has so far been cautious about being drawn into recent West Asian conflicts as it continues with its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The visit comes following Araghchi's trips to mediators Pakistan and Oman to discuss the widening conflict, with peace efforts between Tehran and Washington currently on ice.
In any case, there have been developments in the negotiations. The approach taken by the Americans caused the previous round of talks, at least those specific parts where our country was unable to reach a conclusion and could not achieve its own stated goals due to their excessive demands and the misguided approaches they adopted. It was necessary for us to hold consultations with our friends in Pakistan to assess the latest situation, and thankfully, it was a very productive trip. We also reviewed all that has transpired and determined the circumstances under which the negotiations can proceed.
The safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz is, at this moment, a very important global issue. It is quite natural that we, as the two coastal nations situated along this vital strait, we need to have a discussion together so that our common interests can be secured and we can be in alignment before any action is taken in this regard, because the interests of both Iran and Oman are directly tied to this matter. Praise be to God, we found a great deal of common ground between us and Oman. And we also reached agreements for our consultations to continue at the expert level.
Arakchi's trips come against the backdrop of the stalled negotiations with the U.S., as both sides reject several of each other's demands. It also comes amid reports of Tehran conveying a fresh proposal to the United States through Pakistani mediators, prioritizing reopening the Strait of Hormuz and bringing the ongoing war in West Asia to an end, while deferring contentious nuclear negotiations to a later stage. On Saturday, U.S. President Donald Trump scrapped a planned trip to Islamabad by his envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, telling reporters the United States has all the cards.
I'll deal with whoever runs the show. They don't know. They are fighting with each other. There's tremendous infighting. They're probably fighting for leadership. In many cases, I think they're fighting not to be the leader, because we knocked out two levels of leaders. But I'll deal with whoever we have to. But there's no reason to wait 2 days, have people traveling for 16, 17 hours. We're not doing it that way. We'll do it. When they want, they can call me. We have all the cards. We've won everything. We have all the cards. Nothing. It's just that they gave us a paper that should have been better. And interestingly, immediately when I canceled it, within 10 minutes, we got a new paper that was much better.
In a bombshell escalation, Iran slams down a non-negotiable three-phase ultimatum via secret mediators, vowing direct talks with America resume only if Washington grovels to Tehran's ironclad demands. According to a report by Al Mayadeen's correspondent in Tehran, Iran has informed mediators of a proposed three-phase framework for negotiations with the United States and signaled that talks could resume if Washington agrees to the plan. The report suggests Tehran is attempting to reshape the order of discussions by placing security guarantees ahead of every other issue. The first phase of the reported proposal focuses on ending what Iran describes as U.S.-Israeli aggression and securing guarantees that military action will not resume against Iran or Lebanon. Al Mayadeen reports that during this opening stage, Tehran would refuse to discuss any other matter until those assurances are formally secured. If the first phase succeeds, the second stage would reportedly move toward the management of the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most critical energy choke points. The plan is said to involve coordination with Oman to create a new legal framework governing the strategic waterway. Any shift there could immediately affect global shipping routes and oil prices. Only after agreements are reached in the first two phases would Iran reportedly agree to discuss its nuclear program. This sequencing indicates Tehran wants regional security and maritime leverage settled before entering the most contentious diplomatic file. These developments come as Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Arakchi has departed from Moscow, leading a diplomatic delegation. Iranian Ambassador Kazem Jalali said Arakchi is expected to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin for consultations on the latest developments regarding negotiations and the ceasefire. If confirmed, The plan signals a bold Iranian attempt to rewrite the diplomatic agenda while bringing Moscow deeper into the process. The next moves from Washington and Russia could decide whether this becomes a breakthrough or another dangerous deadlock.
Meanwhile, Iran's parliament security chief, Ibrahim Azizi, drops a defiant hammer. Tehran flatly rejects any nuclear talks with the United States, slamming the door on Washington for good.
There are absolutely no grounds for engaging in any negotiations with the Americans. And of course, especially regarding the nuclear issue, there has never been any foundation for such talks.
Was enrichment. And our red line has consistently been that enrichment must be recognized as an undeniable reality because we believe enrichment, as the martyred Imam himself stated.
Of course, every war without exception ultimately concludes with some form of negotiation and a ceasefire.
Negotiate.
No war, not even World War I or II, failed to eventually reach certain stages of resolution. But we believe that this still needs to the Zionist regime must in particular be subjected to a far more stringent and resolute course of action and be compelled to receive a response that is entirely proportionate to the malevolent acts it has perpetrated. The legitimate and inherent rights of the Islamic Republic of Iran in this strait must be fully recognized and upheld. Payment must be made in Iran's national currency, the rial. This plan stipulates that the Zionist regime vessels belonging to the Zionist regime, cargo, freight, or any vessel are not permitted to transit under any pretext. It won't end.
Even if we give 400 kilograms, the problem won't be resolved. Without a doubt, the Americans will only increase their demands. What has led us to victory is our steadfastness, our resistance, and preventing the Americans' excessive demands and overreach.
Purity in our heart, quality in your car. 50 साल से लक्ष्मी है ना?
But analysts are cautious. A thousand missiles, thousands of drones, and a message meant to be heard far beyond the battlefield. Iran has unveiled a dramatic contingency plan, claiming it could unleash up to 1,000 ballistic missiles and 3,000 drones within the first 24 hours of a renewed war. The announcement comes from Ahmad Wahidi, a senior figure in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, as tensions with the United States and Israel remain dangerously high. The message is clear. Iran wants to project strength and deterrence. The video released alongside the announcement shows military parades, mobile missile launchers, and long-range drones, highlighting both capability and intent. Among them, variants of the Shad series drones, designed for long-range, precision strikes. But this isn't just about numbers, it's about recovery. After weeks of intense airstrikes earlier this year, targeting missile sites, production facilities, and senior commanders, Iran is signaling that it has rebuilt, and perhaps even expanded. Officials claim underground facilities are back online, stockpiles are growing, and production is accelerating, faster than before the war. At the same time, Tehran says it maintains firm control over the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point through which nearly a fifth of the world's oil flows. That control gives Iran leverage, not just militarily, but economically. And it's using that leverage, demanding that the United States lift its naval blockade as a condition for reopening the strait, a key sticking point in stalled negotiations. But analysts are cautious. Many view the announcement as strategic signaling, not necessarily an immediate operational plan. Launching that scale of attack would require coordination, logistics, and sustained capacity, all of which may have been affected by recent strikes. Still, the message matters, because deterrence isn't just about what you can do, it's about what your adversary believes you can do. And in this case, Iran is sending a signal to multiple fronts, to Washington, to Tel Aviv, and to the broader region. The timing is also critical. This comes amid a fragile ceasefire, brokered after weeks of conflict that began in late February, a ceasefire that has held on paper but remains under constant strain. On the ground, tensions continue. At sea, the standoff over shipping routes intensifies, and in the air, both sides remain on alert. Iran's leadership is also navigating internal pressures, power shifts, and the need to project unity and control. The unveiling of this plan serves multiple purposes: military, political, psychological, because in modern conflict, perception can be as powerful as firepower. For now, the missiles remain in place, the drones remain grounded, but the warning has been delivered. And in a region already on edge, that may be enough to shift the balance.
Subscribe to One India and never miss an update.
The recent proposal. What is this proposal coming from Iran? According to a recent report, Iran informed the mediators of a three-stage negotiating formula. How was it distributed? Iran links discussions on the nuclear issue to first reaching an agreement on ending the war and arrangements regarding the Strait of Hormuz. What are the details? Now, logically, it makes sense because it's too difficult to talk about everything all at once. Imagine sitting on the negotiating table with your worst enemy and trying to reach a deal over everything. No, you prioritize. The main thing is to get the big things out of the way. So let's say ceasefire, let's end the war, let's guarantee on a non-hostile future, for example, have certain guarantees that you won't attack us, we won't attack you either. And you can't really dictate what we do or what we don't do from our sovereign interests, from our national interests, security interests, things to do with our defenses. You have no say in that whatsoever. So what did they say in this three-stage proposal, Iran? According to this report, this three-stage negotiating formula was suggested by Iran, stressing that Tehran would negotiate according to this formula if Washington accepted it. Al-Mayadeen's correspondent indicated that Iran informed the mediators of a negotiating formula based on three stages, and if Washington accepts it, negotiations will continue. According to the sources, the first phase of the talks focuses on ending the war and obtaining guarantees that it will not be renewed against Iran and Lebanon, and no other issues will be discussed at this stage. So we firstly have a situation where, number one, Iran wants to end the war against it and Lebanon, proving that we're talking about a new phase here, not in the favor of Israel, nor the United States, by the way. The United States had no interest in having like joint fronts like this. It was not like this before at any point. And thanks to Israel and America's stupidity, they made Iran have this capability now because they had the upper hand. So they'll tell them now, Lebanon included, and you're going to have to accept it. And on paper, it was accepted, but we still have breaches. It's just that the Lebanese resistance isn't willing to accept any of the nonsense and BS that the United States and Israel tried to push against it. A ceasefire with us attacking, but not you. Ceasefire means ceasefire, not ceasefire from one side. But hey, this mentality coming from these people over there, this is how they think, that they can tell the other side, no, you don't respond, but we can attack you whenever we want. So Lebanon included. However, this sentence here is very important. And if Washington accepts it, negotiations will resume. So is Iran excluding any resumption of talks without this formula being accepted? It's not clear so far. Let's go to the rest of the report here. He added that Tehran will not discuss any other issues in the first phase. If an agreement is reached, the process will move to the second phase to discuss how to manage the Strait of Hormuz after the end of the war. So firstly, we have the war, making sure the war ends. Don't talk about Hormuz. After we agree on that, we start talking about how it's managed, between which countries, fees, what you can pass, what you cannot pass, and all of these details. Our correspondent explained that the research in the Strait of Hormuz phase will be conducted in coordination with the Omani side to establish a new legal system. The third stage is related to the discussion of the nuclear file, as Iran insists on its refusal to discuss this file before reaching an agreement on the first and second stages. So here we have a clarification. Iran refuses at least to talk about these subjects in this stage, which indicates that the United States will have no option but to negotiate ending the war, assuming they want to do that, assuming anyone from the other side wants to do that, before talking about Iran's nuclear agreement. This comes after the Iranian foreign ministry announced that Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi headed to the Russian capital Moscow at the head of a diplomatic delegation following a tour that included Islamabad and Muscat. The Iranian news agency Tasnim, quoting sources, reported that Araghchi's visit to Pakistan is not related to the nuclear negotiations, but rather comes as a continuation of his recent consultations with Pakistani officials. So in essence, Iran made it clear. 3 phases or not 3 phases, there are certain things that they won't be talking about initially. So nukes, it's not going to be discussed so long as you're not concluding the war ended. Then if there's a problem with the Strait of Hormuz, let's firstly agree on ending the war, then we will move to the Strait of Hormuz. Which makes sense. Makes sense. It has logic behind it. The two sides are at war, technically. And from an Iranian perspective, that is the way to end it. However, is the American side interested in any of that? We're not really convinced that the United States is interested in any of that, because the United States is supporting a genocidal, infanticidal entity wreaking havoc and continuing its killing machine and spree, both in Lebanon and in Gaza. Every day in Gaza, we have martyrs, children getting killed, bombed. People are starving. Life, they can't live normally. No rebuilding, no nothing. And they're using this disarming thing against the resistance as a demand to have the rebuilding. What kind of a world is this? People living in tents, some under the rubble of their own house, risking dying every single day. That's the reality that they live in. And that is the United States, by the way, and everyone who supports Israel or recognizes its legitimacy, therefore legitimizing its actions. That is the situation that we have.
Right now, misinformation spreads faster than facts, especially on
work, besides which there is tremendous infighting and confusion within their, quote, leadership. Nobody knows who is in charge, including them. Also, we have all the cards. They have none. If they want to talk, all they have to do is call President Donald J. Trump. He also justified not sending them because it's too expensive. Let's get to the next one.
I run a podcast solo. No producer, no editor, no tech skills, just Riverside. I get high.
I think Pakistan is terrific. I think the field marshal is fantastic. I think the prime minister of Pakistan is great. And, you know, they'd like to see something happen, but we're not going to be traveling 15, 16 hours to have a meeting with people that nobody ever heard of.
What changed to make you make that decision?
Too much travel. And when they say the meeting's scheduled for Tuesday, I said, Tuesday, that's a long time from now. But when you get right down to it, it's a lot of traveling. No, we don't want to do that.
At what point do you send Witkoff and Kushner and send Vice President Vance in? At what point are you going to be ready?
They're all very competent, all three. Those are three good. But they weren't meeting with the leader of the country. They were meeting with other people. And I said, we're just not going to do it. Too much traveling, takes too long, too expensive. I'm a very cost-conscious person.
Too expensive. He's a very cost-conscious person. It doesn't exactly pass the smell test. The big deal here is basically they had a ceasefire deadline. The ceasefire deadline expired. There were no negotiations that happened. The Iranian terms were made pretty clear.
It was
the U.S.
See, it was Iranians are smart. They invented chess. It was a trap. You see what you just said? They're not even meeting with the leader of a country. You don't get to meet with the supreme leader. None of y'all do. Who the hell are y'all? They thought the Pakistani dictator, the field marshal, the leader of the army, which controlled Pakistan, the prime minister, not shit. They thought he was so powerful. I tell you, a couple days ago, he flew to Iran. He thought he would be able to go meet the supreme leader. Man, please. Now, your cane probably bugged. You're being tracked. They thought that clown was going to go find out where the supreme leader was at so they can kill him. Now they pissed because Iran put Pakistan in a place. Say, hold on, you don't got enough rank to meet our spiritual leader.
U.S. terms were also all up in the air. They saw the Iranian terms, if they agreed to them, as a total capitulation. And so we're kind of in a space that Trita Parsi predicted going into this, which is Trump actually can just walk away. The blockade is still in place. The war is not being restarted. It's also not really off. We're in this weird, semi-hot zone where there is, of course, a naval blockade, an act of war. There, of course, is military pressure on the Iranian regime, but they don't seem anxious to restart the war either. And now everybody's kind of in a limbo, waiting for something to change and for something to happen. And in the interim, several million barrels of oil per day are getting shut in and are not exiting the Straits of Hormuz, which is the only thing that really matters out of this conflict so far.
Yeah, and the thing is that this limbo state that we're in right now, which you're absolutely right, Trita Parsi has been saying, hey, this is probably where this is going to end up. It's unlikely that they're able to resolve enough issues to actually come to a deal. I'm not sure this limbo state is a stable outcome. So for a variety of reasons, I mean, number one, you've got the Israelis who are itching to go back to war. And you were just saying, Sagar, we're seeing in the news, bombing the hell out of Lebanon. We'll find any means possible to not only go back to war with Iran, but get us back into war with Iran. So you have that. And then we're going to talk more about the situation with oil later in the show. But the damage to our economy and to the global economy is going to continue as long as the Strait of Hormuz is closed. And at some point, the markets are going to reflect the actual reality of how many barrels, millions of barrels of oil have been shut out of the economy. So while Trump is betting that that pressure will be larger on Iran, they of course have more existential stakes. He's also betting that pressure will be more of a problem for the other rest of the globe, which is probably true, but that doesn't mean it's not going to have dire impacts here as well, which is why this is such, it's just impossible to see how this all plays out, given that there are effectively no good alternatives for Trump at this point. I also wanted to talk about a little bit about this Barack Ravid report that came out yesterday evening, just before oil futures markets open and whatever, about how the Iranians are now offering a new approach where the issues with Strait of Hormuz would be worked out before dealing with the nuclear file. And, I think it's obviously noteworthy that this comes from Barack Ravid, noteworthy that it comes right at a key market point. I think this is another attempt of Trump to say, look, they're still negotiating. They still want to work with us. There's still a possibility of getting something done here, which does indicate that he realizes there is some pressure on him to bring some sort of resolution to this whole thing.
Well, I mean, even if the Iranians were to agree, if they were to propose that, they would unambiguously win, because the removal of the removal of the blockade and some sort of resumption through the Straits of Hormuz with no nuclear talks means that their trump card was able to basically just be resolved on its face with no concessions whatsoever on nuclear issues, on ballistic missiles, or on any of their support for Hezbollah or any of these other groups. And the regime itself got to survive and completely intact. So absolutely nothing would have changed as a result of the war. If anything, Iran may have been stronger. So I think you're right that this is probably a market type move. But, look, everyone has eyes in the same way that to describe it in the way that I did. If the administration opened or signed some sort of deal, removal of the blockade in exchange for opening of the Straits of Hormuz, it would contradict everything Trump has said about the Straits of Hormuz. He said, I don't need it. It's actually China and Russia and all these other, or China and India and all these other companies or countries in Asia that are really reliant on the Straits of Hormuz. It's not really that important to us. And the fact that they were able to close it and then he could just reopen it by removing the blockade, but except the blockade was supposed to get them to the negotiating table over nuclear issues and many other things, it would be a total failure. But that's one reason why I'm not so sure the Iranians would agree to it. They have made it clear, Strait of Hormuz and control in some form, whether it be via sanctions relief, whether it be via tolls that are directly charged, there will be de facto or at least some control and some monetary mechanism in place after the war. So I don't know why they would necessarily agree to it. The other thing is on the blockade. There is a blockade in place in name. Now, how much of it is real? We do not know. Remember that very clearly. Tanker Trackers has indicated there are some ships that were laden with a lot of oil that had to return to Iranian ports. But per satellite imagery, they've been able to confirm some ships have also been able to evade the blockade, and other ships have been able to come through and to load. So how much of it is actually happening? How many of these naval vessels either are afraid or they don't want to put themselves in a situation where they're getting fired upon by these small IRGC vessels? We also know, by the way, about mining. I think we have that here somewhere. Actually, no, it's in the next block. We'll talk about it in a little bit. But the whole point is that Iran, we do know, at least current U.S. intelligence is suggesting that they have laid more additional mines in the Straits of Hormuz. A current estimate from the Washington Post is it would take approximately 6 months to clear all of those mines to resume totally normal traffic. Now, the only reason why that matters, and I'm mentioning it here, is for some sort of a deal. Iran, with the mines, knowing exactly where they are, would have control because they would have to tell the various different ships which way to go to be able to avoid some of the different channels and other places which have the mines in them. Again, that gives them more leverage in some sort of negotiation. Let's play A3 here, where Trump again reiterates that they can call us anytime they want, basically saying this is all going to be negotiated by phone.
Son of a biscuit. What's the fudge? Mother...
Probably heard that we canceled the trip. We have all the cards. We're not going to spend 15 hours in airplanes all the time going back and forth. to be giving a document that was not good enough. And so we'll deal by telephone, and they can call us anytime they want. Again, we have all the cards. They have no military left, practically. They have no leaders left. We don't know who the leaders are. Nobody knows who the leader. I don't think they know who the leaders are, very importantly. So
that is from Trump about making a call. There also is some indication, one of the reasons, so Trump may have called things off with Islamabad, but there is some indication that it's actually Iran which left Islamabad and kind of gave up on the Pakistan track. Let's put the next one up here on the screen. This is very important. This was from an Iranian advisor, and he says, Pakistan is a good friend and neighbor of ours, but it is not a suitable intermediary for negotiation and lacks the necessary credibility for mediation. They always take Trump interests into account and do not say a word against the American wishes. For example, they are unwilling to tell the world America first accepted Pakistan's proposal, but then went back on its word. They do not say that the Americans had commitments regarding the issues of Lebanon and the blocked assets to fulfill them. A mediator must be impartial, not always leaning to one side. The reason why I think that's important is it fits with a lot of leaks that were coming out of the Iranian side, Crystal, in the last several days, where they said, Pakistan, sure, it was nice that, they hosted us for talks in the initial ceasefire negotiation and what we agreed to. That was definitely something that we were interested in. However, since that time, all they do is reiterate the American side to us, but they don't push the Americans to change their terms. And all Pakistan has really been doing is acting as a U.S. client state, urging Iran to change some of its red lines or some of its positions and refusing to do so with the United States side. And that's part of the reason why the foreign minister Arachi actually left Pakistan a few days ago. And after he departed, there was no movement whatsoever in the talks. I think they may have given up on the Islamabad track whatsoever.
Not to mention, if we put A6 up on the screen, this is something Ryan had his eyes on. Basically, it looks like the Pakistanis were helping Trump to market manipulate on Friday. Ryan tweets out here, the erroneous news reports indicating the U.S. and Iran would be restarting talks were produced because Pakistan's ISPR sent the following incorrect update to many journalists. They didn't send it directly to me, but I was forwarded. This was the message. Breaking. Attributable to government sources, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Arachi is expected to arrive in Islamabad tonight with a small delegation. Following important discussions with the Pakistani mediation team, a second round of Islamabad peace talks between the U.S. and Iran is expected. A U.S. logistics and security team is already present in Islamabad to facilitate the negotiation process. Ryan then goes on to say it was never true that Arachi had any plans to re-enter negotiations last week. Why would the Pakistanis say otherwise anyway? Odd stuff. Mm-hmm. So basically the idea here is that, this was hopium from the U.S. side and from the Pakistani side. And even though the Iranians had never indicated, we know this from Jeremy's reporting, had never committed to any sort of talks in Islamabad, Pakistan went ahead and put this out. And so, of course, the fact that they are carrying the message that the U.S. wants to put forward of like, oh, of course the Iranians want to meet with us. Of course they want to negotiate. Of course they're begging to come up to the table because we have all the cards. The fact that the Pakistanis are pushing this out to journalists and representing the American view and what the American propaganda wants to, push to the public, I think gives you a sense of why the Iranians are feeling less and less comfortable with Pakistanis as mediators.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the Pakistanis at this point, they haven't had the ability to compel anything from the Americans to stick to. I mean, it makes sense, right? I mean, they're a client state in every respect of the word. Now, remember also, one of the reasons why they were interested is not just that they had okay relations with Iran. Remember, this country gets 99% of its natural gas from Qatar. So it had a massive interest in making sure that the Straits of Hormuz were open. And initially, they thought that the Americans would agree to some of the terms, but it just doesn't look like that's the case. I mean, we're going to talk about it later in the show. Israel killed like 13 people just yesterday in Lebanon and injured some 37 others. So the death toll, and look, Hezbollah also killed an IDF soldier. So the idea that there's a ceasefire in place whatsoever in Lebanon is ridiculous. And, it seems that that's one of the axes in which Iran continues to point to and is like, look, you are not sticking to the deals and you just simply will not constrain Israeli action in Lebanon at all. Let's put A5, please, up on the screen. This is Trump talking about oil. The Iranian vice president and head of the Organization for Energy Optimization issued a direct warning Sunday in response to Trump's claim that the U.S. naval blockade would cause Iran's infrastructure to explode. Quote, we will respond to any act of war If, as Trump claims, any part of our infrastructure, including oil wells, is damaged as a result of the blockade, we guarantee that 4 times the damage will be inflicted on the same infrastructure in countries that support the aggressor. Because this was something that Trump had previously floated on Fox News when in an interview about hitting Iranian oil wells in retaliation. Let's put the next one up there on the screen. This is A7 from Arachi, the foreign minister. He says, I am now embarking on a timely tour of Islamabad, Muscat, and Moscow. Purpose of my visit is to closely coordinate with our partners on bilateral matters and consult on regional developments. Our neighbors are our priority. So this was on April 24th. So he is going to Islamabad, like I said, but it's not just the sole place that he's going. He also mentions Muscat, so that is Oman, which, remember, was a key negotiating partner ahead of the launch of the war. And the Omani foreign minister took to television saying, we can work this out. This doesn't have to be this way, and really did a plead, I think, with the American government, only to really get pretty upset at how they were effectively used as cover. And then finally, Moscow. So I don't think that takes any explanation here. It's not like Iran is a full-on client state or anything of Russia, but they have good relations, largely as a result of their animus towards the United States. And they have a military relationship that spans now to Ukraine, considering that they have supplied many of these Shahed drones to the Russian government, which they have used to great effect in the war in Ukraine. And now, obviously, they're using them themselves in their own war. And in some cases, they're getting some sort of assistance from Moscow and from Beijing as well. The fact that Beijing's not on the list is very interesting, but the very fact that he is going to Moscow, the foreign minister, and that they will stand in solidarity, especially against the United States, is a direct message and a kind of a middle finger, I think, to Washington. So that's what I think. That's basically where we stand right now.
Yeah, and Trump talks a lot about who has the cards here. Let's talk a little bit about the damage that Iran has already been able to do and some of the cards that they may continue to hold.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at Breaking Points.
his students to be good. Yeah, it's good.
Hey, yeah, I'm not going to be one of those teachers that when the students overtake him, get jealous and go, oh, well, no. I encourage your success.
Larry, let me start with what has happened with the meeting. It was a White House Correspondents' Dinner at Washington Hilton Hotel. And what's something strange? Someone came in, penetrating these layers of security and shooting at the participants of the event. And here is what one of the, a witness of what has happened. She's just explaining what has happened during that event.
From me to that building, and there was a security guy there too. I mean, I don't think anyone knew what he was doing.
What did he look like?
I'm not even sure what he looked like.
And what made you think he's the shooter? How do you know?
I saw him put the gun together and start shooting.
Oh my God.
Yes. I mean, he put it together and started and ran towards the stairs to go down to the ballroom.
Who did he shoot? In what direction did he shoot? What did he shoot?
I don't know what he shot. It just seemed like he was shooting all over the place.
Larry, putting gun together, it remembers Tyler Robinson putting the gun together.
Yeah, well, I don't know what she's talking about, because the reports that were put out said he had two types of firearms. He had a shotgun, which you don't need to put that together. It can be disassembled, but that's not an easy process of just pressing a button and it comes apart. And he carried a semi-automatic pistol. It's called a 380. It was that's the caliber. So again, where did he? She implies that it was a long gun. There's a CCTV footage of him coming. He runs down a hallway, and then you see him sprinting past the security guards, and then you see them draw their weapons and start firing in his direction. But you don't see you'd see a long gun. I mean, that's not easy to hide. So we're not seeing that. So that's what sort of puzzles me. So it appears that he had just the handgun, and that's what was fired. But just lots of odd things, because how did they take him down? We got no footage of that. And I guarantee you they got footage of that, but they're not showing it. He wasn't shot. Now, if he's carrying a firearm and if he's firing a firearm with all of those Secret Service personnel and then supplemented by police, he should have been lit up like a Christmas tree. I mean, they should have filled him with so many holes. He would have, he could have done Swiss cheese advertisements. But he wasn't shot. He didn't have any visible gun wounds. When the picture they show him of him when he's handcuffed laying on the ground, there's both a picture from the front and then a longer distance shot from the side. There's no blood coming out. You don't see any. Nobody's provided. You don't see an EMT or one of the police officers with rubber gloves on doing first aid. You don't have that. And some say, well, maybe he could have been shot in the leg. Again, if he's shot in the leg, you're going to have a tourniquet on, and you're going to be providing medical treatment. There was no medical personnel around him. They're just letting him, lie there on the ground. It looks like they stripped him completely naked, which is why he's laying there, and then he's got this silver emergency blanket over him. So those are the odd things about. People were apparently there were shots fired. We know that at least 6 to 8 shots fired. Where did the bullets go? And again, I'm not suggesting that this was, quote, staged. Orchestrated is the better word. Because when you say staged, it sounds like you're suggesting it was not real. No, it was real. And I believe this guy was the real deal. But then you get into did he come up with this on his own? Or did he have somebody encourage him to do this and help him prepare to do this? I think it's the latter. Just by virtue of the fact that his decision to travel cross country on train, carrying a shotgun and this handgun, as opposed to flying. Well, if you fly, you would have had to fill out paperwork, and you would have had to, lock the cases, lock the gun case, and both for the handgun and the shotgun, and it would have been in the belly of the aircraft. On Amtrak, on the train coming across country, you don't have to do that. And that's one of the real security gaps still in the U.S. transportation system. You can get on a train and you can have a concealed weapon on you, and nobody's going to know the difference until you get it out and start shooting. So, who maybe, he thought it, came up with it on his own. Hey, I should probably take the train instead of the plane. But then good Lord, that's a good solid 2-day journey. Maybe they can get it done in 24 hours cross country on train, but that's an arduous trip. And but then the real thing that caught my eye, when all of this shooting starts, the very first person that's taken off stage is J.D. Vance. And you're going, what? Look, Secret Service job is to protect the president. Okay? They'd also protect the vice president, but the number one guy to protect is the president. So as soon as you hear gunshots, they grabbing his ass and hauling him out of there is what should have happened. That did not happen. After J.D. Vance, from the time that they grabbed J.D. Vance and start him off stage, 20 seconds pass before the Secret Service grabbed Trump and start moving him. And what's interesting is when the shooting starts, Melania reacts with horror, and Trump's just like looking at her. Trump's not, he's been shot at before. You think he'd be flinching? He's not flinching. It's almost like he knew this was going to happen. Did he know? I don't know. But his reaction was strange. And then that of the Secret Service detail for him it just didn't follow protocol. So, I think when they look at this in retrospect, that the Secret Service failed on several counts. One, how did this guy get past the checkpoint with a firearm? And because you say, well, he ran through it and they didn't stop. Look, one of those, if you got a security checkpoint with metal detectors and people have to come through and put their belongings down and get checked, you also, as part of the planning for that, you step back and say, okay, we're going to have some additional screeners there that if you have to pull somebody aside, they can use a hand wand and check them out. And then you got at least two additional people who are carrying like a short-barreled rifle and can stand there. And the effect is that in the event someone actually tries to run through, breach it, they can stop them with deadly force, or they can at least tackle them. But if you've seen somebody with a firearm, my understanding from talking to a friend of mine who ran Ronald Reagan's Secret Service detail, that if someone's got a gun and they're anywhere in the vicinity of the president, you shoot them. You don't ask questions. You don't tell them to stop, drop your weapon. None of that. You shoot them. That they've got that rule of engagement, which is they can use deadly force without fear of prosecution in that case.
Hi, my name is Cole. I went to Virginia Tech, and I'm about 4 years out of school.
I think Larry, if it was orchestrated, as you just mentioned, what is the main objective of that interview? What do they want from this?
So there could be a number of explanations. One explanation is, let's say that this was orchestrated with Israel wanting to remind Trump that, hey, if you don't do what we say, we can get you. Another assassination attempt. Another possible explanation. Trump wanted to use this, as he did in the subsequent press conference, as an excuse, as justification for building the ballroom, the new ballroom at the White House. Now, look, this had nothing. The security failure, the fact that this could happen, had nothing to do with the construction of the building. It had to do with the failure of the Secret Service to follow proper procedure. Now, let's also acknowledge, though, the shooter did not, the system ultimately worked. The shooter did not get into the ballroom. The shooter did not kill anybody that was in attendance, as it was his stated intention. So even though the Secret Service failed to fully follow protocol, what system they had in place there still ended up working and preventing the president from being shot.
Yeah. It seems that I was using the wrong microphone here.
Oh yeah, you're bad.
Every time we have to put I don't know what StreamYard is doing here, but it's so strange. By the way, every time we have to do this.
Yeah, you sound better now.
Yeah, it's better right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Larry, getting out of this sort of propaganda that is happening in Washington and Donald Trump's, he's putting all of us in some sort of, he's distracting us from what's going on in the Middle East. What is your understanding about these new sort of weapons that they're sending to the Middle East, basically to the UAE and Qatar? We've seen a lot of, cargo planes going there. What does that mean?
I don't know. Well, let's put it this way. Back when they first deployed assets into the Middle East, into the Gulf, that was about 60 days ago. In fact, let's see, today's the 27th, 31 days in March, that's 58, one day, 28th February. So, it's 59 days, almost 60 days. Normally, those initial deployments, they go out with 55 to 60 days of supplies. So the units that were deployed, what they're getting now are basically, they're getting replenished, resupplied with what they've already used up. They're getting resupplied. I don't think, but saying that, there's not a lot of, it's not like they're bringing in more Patriot missile batteries and more THAAD missiles. They don't have them. I was, over the weekend, late last week, CNN put out numbers based upon talking to people at the Pentagon and some other government offices, that they said, for example, the Patriots, they used up 50% of the Patriots. That just doesn't make sense. It's much worse than that. And here's the math on it, that from 2015 to the end of 2025, they produced 4,620 of PAC-3 missiles. And now we're into month 4, we're coming into the end of April. So on average, let's give Lockheed Martin credit that they're producing 60 a month. So, so now they will have potentially 240 more. Well, of that 6,420, at least 1,000, and I believe it may have been closer to 2,000, almost a third of it, was sent in foreign military sales to other countries like South Korea and Japan and Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Then you had 1,000 that were used up in Ukraine. So, we're now down to 3,000, let's say 3,600. And a number of those PAC-3 missiles were used in the June 12th war. So let's say that's another 1,000 that was used. So now we're down to less than a third of the initial amount. So they're carrying whatever resupply. These planes are carrying whatever resupplies they can. But what the reality for the United States is, its precision strike missiles and these air defense systems are being depleted, and depleted very quickly. So I don't think there are any troops that are being ferried over there for a ground operation, for one reason. You look at the structure right now of Central Command. You have the commander for the aviation combined components, the general, Air Force general. You have a general or an admiral for the maritime components that are in there. And then they both report to the commander of CENTCOM, who's also called the Joint Force Commander. What are you missing? You don't have a ground force commander. There hasn't been one designated. So if you're going to use ground forces, you would have a ground force commander. So until we see that happen, that tells me there's not going to be any kind of ground operation. Because the last thing you want is an admiral or an Air Force general directing ground operations. That, let's reverse that. Would you take an Army general that runs the, like Keith Kellogg, 82nd Airborne? Would you put him in charge of running an aircraft carrier? Hell no. He's not qualified to do, just because he's a general Doesn't mean he's qualified to do that, because it requires knowledge of air operations off the deck of a carrier, for God's sake. So this is, I think a lot of this movement is replenishment, the resupply, but, you know, they are prepared. They're putting in place all the assets to renew the conflict. What is unknown is the attitude of the commander of the ground force and the commander of the aviation component and the commander of the maritime component. If they are saying, "Oh yeah, man, we can do anything, let's go," my understanding is that both have registered strong, I don't want to call it protest, but they say that if we shouldn't renew the attack. We don't have the assets, and it's going to further deplete us, and we're not going to accomplish, you know, there's no clear goals that we can accomplish. What remains to be seen is whether or not the Admiral Cooper, who is the Joint Forces commander, shares their sentiment and then passes it on to both Hegseth and Trump. So the way the chain of command works here is the commander of CENTCOM reports directly through the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of Defense to the President. General Kane, who is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that is he's the president's top military advisor per legislation, but he's not a decision maker in the chain of command. He's more like giving advice, and I don't think that's a good idea, I wouldn't do that, which is reportedly what happened. Was it a week ago, 2 weeks ago now, when they had that emergency meeting to decide how to proceed against Iran. And that's when the whole issue of using a nuclear weapon came up. And it was initially reported, the report I got was that he was, quote, wanting access to the codes, but that's not correct. Well, what actually happened was Trump was beginning to raise and say, okay, we should explore the possibility of using a nuclear weapon to send a message to Iran. And General Kane said, no, and hell no, we're not going to do that. So that was, and that, you know, once word of that got out, Trump was ultimately, he made a point of saying, denying, oh no, we're not going to use nukes. So that's the good news. It appears that's off the table.
Wake up to a world of possibilities and discover a resort destination designed for ultimate relaxation. Exhilarating winds and a rush becomes standard with every experience. Welcome to the world of WinStar.
I think our assessment, we talked on Friday, and our assessment was that the war is coming and we should have had the second, round of war by now. That's why I think one of the main reasons that is not happening as we talk is because of this sort of new attitude on the part of generals in the United States. They're trying to give their assessment, to the President of the United States. Do you think that they're getting direct access to the president, or they're sending their message through Pete Hegseth or someone like him?
Well, no, so these generals are official title. So you have the commander of Central Command, CENTCOM. Then under him, you got the Combined Forces Air Component Commander, which is the CFACC. That's the General Derek France, I believe is his name. And then you have the Combined Forces Maritime Component Commander, the CFMCC. So they report directly to Cooper. They don't go around Cooper. They don't call up Pete Hegseth and say, oh, we haven't told Admiral Cooper this yet, but no, they do follow the chain of command. So their views are presented to Cooper. It's up to Cooper then to present that to the Secretary of Defense, and then the Secretary of Defense is supposed to convey that to the President or the Secretary of Defense or Secretary of War. We've gone from SOD to SOW. That the Secretary of War can direct the commander of CENTCOM to communicate directly with President Trump.
Yeah. Larry, the negotiations and the talks, we had the Iranian foreign minister going to Islamabad and sending, in his first visit, he gave them a document, then he updated that. It seems that right now the basics for the negotiations are, they're talking about the Strait of Hormuz, how to reopen the Strait of Hormuz permanently. And the other point, I think, is the case of Lebanon is on the table right now. It's so much related to the Strait of Hormuz as it comes to the Iranian mind. And there is no sign of negotiations on nuclear program so far because they're putting this forward. Let's talk about these issues, then go later on. We're going to have the talks on nuclear program of Iran. What is your assessment of the way that Iran is putting forward its points?
Well, Iran knows what it's doing and what it wants out of the negotiations. The United States does not. It's the Trump keeps talking about that there is confusion on the Iranian side, that they don't know who's in charge, that they don't agree with each other. All he is doing is describing what the reality is on the U.S. side, because on the Iranian side, it's quite clear who's in charge. Everybody has a role to play. And what is it, Ghalibaf?
Ghalibaf.
Okay, Ghalibaf, the head of the legislature. He was the lead negotiator in the last round, but it didn't mean that Araghchi was being shoved aside. To the contrary, Araghchi remains the foreign minister and playing a very prominent role. And the notion that somehow the IRGC is calling the shots and Khamenei is out of the picture, that's not true. So, Araghchi went first, when he first went to Islamabad, was it last Friday or last Thursday, Friday, the expectation was that Witkoff and Kushner were going to jump on a plane, go over and meet with him, but he made it clear, no, I'm not here to meet with them at all. I'm here to talk to the Pakistanis. And so, again, reviewing with Pakistan, they basically gave them the same paper, the same 10-point document that had been presented 2 weeks previously, because it was read. When you read it again, it really hadn't changed anything. So that was for Pakistan to deliver that message to the West. And what was curious about that is Trump came out and said, "Oh yeah, they came back with we've had some movement. They're moving in the right direction." And they presented basically the same document. So Trump either wasn't remembering what they had read previously, or he was wanting to portray it in more positive terms now. Then Araghchi gets on a plane, flies to Oman, and has meetings with the sheikh there. Then he gets back on the plane. Originally, they said he was going to fly from there to Moscow or to Russia. But instead, he goes back to Pakistan. And again, the meeting between the two is described as very upbeat, very positive. But one of the things that comes out of it is Pakistan then basically downgrades security and lifts security restrictions, which was, many interpreters said, okay, there aren't going to be any more negotiations right now in the foreseeable future with the United States, because with those security precautions eliminated, that means the U.S. wasn't coming. And then Arachi flew from there to St. Petersburg and is literally started his meeting with Putin about an hour ago. So it was and the opening comments were very warm and friendly between the two leaders.
Yeah, here is what Arachi said in Moscow.
No, in St. Petersburg.
Iran and Russia are strategic partners. They have always supported us. We have always supported Russians, and our cooperation would continue.
Yeah, he basically saying that these two countries are strategic partners and they're cooperating with each other.
Yeah.
And
so that means they got it's not just a casual relationship.
No, it's getting so close, Larry. They're getting back to back. Iran is supporting Russia, Russia is supporting Iran, and they understand how important is this sort of alliance that they have. I would say partnership they have, because it's not any sort of alliance like what we've seen in NATO. And Larry, I think when it comes to the war, in restarting the war, how is that going to help with what Iran right now said to Pakistan, as you mentioned? How is that going to help a new attack? Let's assume they're going to, I don't know, destroy some bridges, some power plants. And how is that going to help the position of Donald Trump in this war?
Yeah, no, all it does is make you feel good. I blew up all this stuff, and you get to claim that they're devastated. Like, he has wiped out the Air Force, except Iranian planes are still flying. He has wiped out the Navy, except Iranian ships continue to sail on the Strait of Hormuz and into the Indian Ocean. So we've devastated their missile production. No, they haven't. So it is further attacks. They can be spun as being very effective. The West, the number of people in the West that have bought into the lies that have been told about how effective the U.S. bombing was, and I guess I'm fascinated, maybe on sort of an intellectual basis, about when you look at the war in Ukraine and the number of air operations, missile strikes, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, drone strikes that Russia has carried out in Ukraine over the course of the last 4+ years. I mean, it's an enormous amount. It dwarfs anything that Iran has fired at the U.S. forces in Israel, or that Israel and the United States have fired at Iran. And in this context, Ukraine is 1/3 the size of Iran. So I'm just, if from a standpoint of applying military force and getting an achievable outcome, such as a change in government or Iran saying we no longer want to fight, we give up, that's not going to happen, because as you see, even a country like Ukraine can hang on, albeit suffering greatly, but can hang on and not collapse into a fetal position after suffering a week of bombing. So this is the U.S. What this war has exposed are the limitations of U.S. military power, both air power, maritime power, and certainly no ground forces. Ground forces become an impossible task.
Stop letting them increase your rates. I used to let them raise my car insurance every year until I found this huge loophole that insurance companies don't want you to know about. I was paying.
Larry, here is what, the latest news. I was checking this here, and it says that no matter the relationship between Russia and Iran, no matter what is happening, Russia and Iran relation, Russian-Iranian relation will grow stronger. And we've seen the same, Larry, with the case of North Korea. Russia, North Korea, Russia, Iran. China is somehow a little bit more shy. Look at the attitude of China. They're basically behind us and they don't want to come forward. But we've seen how they behaved during the war in Ukraine. They started with this war. We are advocating for peace and Russia should respect the Ukraine. Then they came to the conclusion that Russia has each and every right to defend itself. And is that gonna help GCC countries in the Persian Gulf? Is that gonna help them to understand the reality of what's going on? Because the escalation, if the escalation happens, you've mentioned Iran and the size of Iran, but these countries are not able to survive. They're not going to be able to survive that escalation, considering everything.
Well, yeah, look, the actual, if you want to call it the actual violence that's going to occur and change the face of the geopolitical state in the Persian Gulf, it's on the economic front. The full impact of the cutoff of 20% of the world's supply of oil, 25% of the world's supply of liquid natural gas. There's a significant, I'm not sure what the percentage is on helium and sulfuric acid. And then 35% at least of the world's urea. That when the war started on the 28th, we didn't see an immediate cutoff because, you know, the way liquid natural gas and helium and oil are transported, they're loaded onto tankers. And so those tankers that were at sea, even though in theory we look and say, okay, they're not producing any more oil right now in Saudi Arabia that we can see significantly, or in Qatar or Bahrain. Nonetheless, there was still oil on the high seas that was headed to destinations. And those tankers travel at the speed of somebody riding a bicycle, like 10 kilometers per hour. So it takes a while for it to get to ports. And so when it started arriving at ports around the world, the prices people had been paying before for oil, it was like, say, $70 a barrel. Well, now that oil is coming in and they're having to pay $130, $150. In Singapore, they had recorded like the second week of the war, $210 for a barrel of oil. And people need to keep in mind, you're going to hear them talking about what the paper price is on Brent futures, or WTI, which stands for West Texas Intermediate. There are futures paper saying, oh, it's worth, the oil's worth, say, $105 according to our paper. But the reality is that doesn't matter what you're trying to bet on the future. When the ship actually gets there and you pay for it, you got to pay what the price is in the actual market, which is much higher, 30 to 40% higher. My point is, now all of that oil that had been out there en route has been delivered, and there's no more ships loaded up behind them. We're done with that. And that means now the actual impact of shortages are going to be felt, and severely felt. And so now we're going to enter a stage of call it economic contraction, significant economic contraction. I think that'll unfold this week and into next week, which is going to put pressure on the United States from a standpoint of negotiation. Because it looks like one of the things that Iran was talking to Oman. Okay, we're going to be partners in controlling what goes in and out of the Persian Gulf, and we'll get paid. Both of us will get paid for it. We're going to, since we're the ones that have the most at risk. So Iran's working that out with Oman. Then it's talking to Pakistan, as well as having Pakistan convey to the United States, here's what Iran's willing to do with respect to the Strait of Hormuz to get it open so commercial traffic starts to go through on a more regular basis. And then he's now in St. Petersburg, Russia, meeting with Putin. And again, I think the status of the Strait of Hormuz is going to come up. The issue of getting out from under U.S. sanctions is going to be addressed. The release of frozen assets. All of that is going to be important because Iran is not just a strategic partner, or within being a strategic partner of Russia, Iran is an essential economic component because of its control, its role of being the north-south corridor that's going to allow goods to flow both from Russia down through Iran to the Indian Ocean, as well as products to come in from the Indian Ocean, go up through Iran, across the Caspian into Russia. So the economic, I guess what I'm saying is, whatever, military strikes could be renewed, but they're not going to accomplish anything strategic. It's simply going to further deplete already scarce missiles, precision strike missiles or precision strike munitions that the United States has, both missiles, glide bombs, cruise missiles, etc. I candidly, I think China is sort of sitting back, hoping that the United States does attack again, on believing that if they did so, it would further deplete U.S. military resources to such an extent that there would now be complete certainty that the United States could never attack China, at least not any time in the near to intermediate future.
And not only north-south corridor, we have the Belt and Road Initiative.
Yes.
That's going. There is a connection between Iran and China, railroad going to China as well. That is important, and they have this communication. I don't know. I don't see any possibility for the United States to disrupt that. They can attack, they can destroy it, but it's just they're getting back to the same. They're going to rebuild it. That's why I think these GCC countries are basically mostly dependent on the Strait of Hormuz more than Iran, much more than Iran. Because, Larry, when they're talking about Saudi Arabia has an alternative, this east-west pipeline, as they're talking about, to the Red Sea. But the problem is they're basically, the production of oil in these facilities are basically close to the Persian Gulf.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not possible just to send all of this to the Red Sea. It's impossible.
No, it's just a limited supply, and it can if this is the other thing. I think it's weighing on the decision whether to renew the attack. Iran has spent now the last 3 weeks getting ready for the next round of attacks, and it's been shoring up its air defense system. It has run in the last 5 days. It's run 2 full-blown exercises. Let's call them live fire exercises, testing their air defense systems in Tehran. Because initially the other night we got reports of drones flying over and explosions going off, and then we thought, okay, here we go. But then it turned out, no, they were testing their air defense system. So that right there tells you, they're getting ready. And if they made it clear, if attacked, and they're not going to wait till the missiles impact in Tehran, as soon as if the United States and Israel go airborne and then launch missiles and such, Iran's going to be immediately firing, and they've got the targets pre-selected. They know where the U.S. assets are. They're going to hit those. In the Persian Gulf, they're going to hit it at Mawafik al-Salti Air Base in Jordan, and then they're going to decimate Israel. They're ready to do that, but they're only going to do that if the West attacks. And I think that's one of the considerations that's weighing heavily, or should weigh heavily anyway, on Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth, is that if they do launch this new round of attacks, it could be very devastating to U.S. assets and further worsen the situation. It'll put the United States in the position of having to use weapons that can now not easily be replaced. And one of the reasons they can't easily be replaced is some of the key components that go into those precision missiles comes from China. And so if China's not providing that, then all of a sudden, the United States, even if they want to operate their factory 24/7, they don't have the materials to produce new precision-guided munitions.
Larry, what do you make of the new reports on CBS News, which points out that Iran has used F-5s to attack American bases in Kuwait? They're basically used. We had previous reports about Su-24S.
Right.
And the Su-24, they have been used, but we haven't seen any evidence that Iran used Su-35 or any fighter jet, Chinese fighter jet. It seems that they have a lot that didn't show so far.
Well, I take all those reports with a grain of salt. I noticed there are now on YouTube several sites with fake Doug McGregor's, fake Scott Ritter's, fake Larry Johnson's, where they have us saying things and reporting on things that never have happened. One that came out had me saying that the Iranians successfully sunk 3 aircraft carriers. You can always tell that these AI are fake. All you got to do is look at the eyes, and the face. The face is not normal. They've done the same with Professor Morandi.
Yeah.
In fact,
they have it with Colonel Wilkerson. I saw one.
Yeah, they got one with Colonel Wilkerson too. So it's just people, need to be cautious out there. If you're seeing a video where myself or any of the other gents that I've mentioned are saying something that seems completely off base, double check it, because it probably is. But this is, again, this is, I take it as it's a backhanded compliment.
They want to discredit, by the way, the analysts. I think that the whole mission is about this.
Yeah, because we're being effective, they're then wanting to try to shut us down. And so I take comfort in that they recognize we're enough of a threat that they've got to try to discredit us. But that I think only enhances our credibility.
Larry, you remember when this war in Ukraine started, we all were talking about how Ukraine could be Austria, for example, something like Austria, and be neutral.
Right.
And just enjoy neutrality.
Right.
And I think that case can be translated in the Middle East, in the West Asia, with the case of Oman. Look at what Oman is today. They're not dependent on Iran. They're not dependent on the West. They're not dependent on anybody in the region. They're a independent state.
Mm-hmm.
And is that going to help other GCC countries to understand that they can be like Oman? They can survive these sort of continuous wars in the Middle East without participating and helping the United States or Israel, by the way, because we've learned that Israel was sending air defense system together with forces to UAE to defend them before this war started.
Yeah, and it turned out those air defense systems were ineffective, if not useless. The two countries that seem to get it, that understand that the future now of the Persian Gulf is with Iran. And so that's Qatar and Oman. And they're looking to work, collaborate with, and get the relationships with Iran in the proper condition. The Saudis are starting to come around. They're still fearful of having to take a back seat to Iran, but they also recognize that U.S. promises to protect them have failed, and that the U.S. weapon systems are frankly not necessarily as good as they were presented or advertised. The big losers will be Kuwait, Then Bahrain is really in trouble. And last, and the one probably in the most trouble, is United Arab Emirates, because their entire business model has collapsed around the coupled with the blockade and the fact that the financing is moving away from the dollar in the direction of the yuan, the Chinese yuan.
Yeah. Larry, we know that the case of Lebanon is so important for Iran, and whatever happens with the negotiations with the United States, Lebanon going to be part of that deal, part of that agreement. And looking at what is happening right now in the southern part of Lebanon and the way that Hezbollah is fighting back, they're talking about if Israel continues with this occupation in the southern part of Lebanon, they're not going to let Israeli people get back to the northern part of Israel.
Right. Yeah. Well, I saw a report just before logging on to chat with you today that, in fact, Israeli forces, while they're intensifying the bombing, the Israeli ground forces are withdrawing. They're starting to withdraw, this is what happened back in 2006, because they got into a ground operation that they couldn't sustain. We just saw as well this morning a film that Hezbollah took. So there was an Israeli helicopter landed, was receiving casualties, and they had quite a group, probably about 25 Israeli soldiers milling about, and they got hit. Then they got hit with a drone that exploded, and as that it was exploding, the helicopter took off and got out of the area. So Israel continues to suffer significant casualties on the ground in southern Lebanon. What they're trying to do is create I'll call it a Gaza Strip. Literally every village that's located along the border, they want to level it, destroy it. The problem is they may create sort of a no man's land, but they're not going to root out Hezbollah. But that's, again, another one of the ploys is to get the Lebanese government, which is run by Christians, on board to go attack Hezbollah with the Lebanese army. So far, there has been some collaboration between the Lebanese government and Israel on the military front, but the Lebanese government's not in a position at all to take on Hezbollah. Hezbollah is still quite strong and quite capable.
You feel that, Larry, Israel today, as we talk, let's assume Iran and the United States reach some sort of agreement. That agreement going to include the ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel, as the way we know that the ceasefire doesn't exist, by the way.
Right.
But after all, how do you see the capabilities of the Israeli government today to what it was before this war started? Or what were the influences of this war on Israeli capabilities?
Yeah, well, I think it's exposed the limitations and weakness of the Israeli military. I've made this point repeatedly, but we're now literally 2.5 years since the start of the retaliation against Hamas for the October 7th attacks. And, Israel mobilized 300,000 troops, it's reservists. They had the entire Gaza Strip surrounded, which means that Hamas had no easy means of resupply. They had to be smuggled through Israeli lines, if that's possible. And I guess it is possible. But the Israelis with tanks and with armored personnel carrier and with artillery and with bombs from fixed-wing aircraft, they've been able to devastate most of the buildings in Gaza. And yet Hamas, who's underground in a variety of bunkers and tunnels that are interconnected, has held off the Israelis. So, you want to present the Israelis as the most powerful military force, but here they get sniped by Hamas, which is not considered a modern military by any stretch. Then Israel goes into southern Lebanon and says, "Oh, we're going to go all the way to the Litani River and set up a buffer zone." They can't get past about 5 to 10 kilometers inside the southern part of Lebanon because Hezbollah has got them pinned down and stopping them and inflicting significant casualties. So this will be another situation in which the Israelis are going to have to retire, retreat, refit, replenish. But in the meantime, there will be elections. And I think we're now increasingly likely that a new government will be formed that will exclude the radical settlers and the Bibi Netanyahu, that will actually try to work out a ceasefire and a legitimate peace deal with Iran, with Hamas. So this is what has happened over the course of both the war in Gaza and the war now in Lebanon. It's weakened Israel, not strengthened it.
Larry, whatever happens between Iran and the United States is going to be between these two countries, and not Europe is not going to be part of this. Europe was part of JCPOA and those snapback sanctions, and they just failed to deliver on their promises they had during JCPOA.
Right.
They didn't do anything, in my opinion, when it comes to the sanctions on Iran, because they did everything that Washington asked them to do. And here is Ursula von der Leyen talking about lifting sanctions on Iran, because the Strait of Hormuz is bringing new reality of the relationship between Iran and Europeans. If they want to have some sort of understanding, mutual understanding, they have to understand that the new leverage Iran has could hit them, and could hit them hard. Here is what Ursula von der Leyen said.
What's realized? It's a performance platform that finds new hunting ground with an agentic decision engine to help me grow incrementally. And as if that wasn't...
We think the dropping of sanctions would be too early, because there's a reason why the sanctions are imposed on Iran. And this reason is their behavior towards the own population. 17,000 young people have been killed alone this year, at the beginning of this year, by the regime. It's the suppression of human rights, and specifically women's rights in Iran, and many other topics that triggered the sanctions. We first have to see a change, a fundamental change in Iran for the dropping of sanctions, and therefore we think it's too early to drop sanctions.
Yeah.
Who cares what she says? She is irrelevant. She doesn't control an army. She has some control over a budget, but she has no power. I mean, it's like listening to a squirrel chirp. Just background noise. No, look, Europe is no longer relevant. The past almost 1,600 years go back to 1492. Columbus sailed the ocean blue. From 1492 on, and maybe start a little bit before that, Europe became the start of the colonial era, where Europe was moving out. They were fighting amongst themselves, but they're busy taking control of other countries around the world, trying to exploit their resources for their own consumption. And Europe was the center. It was the center of music, center of philosophy, center of industry, center of science. Particularly during the 19th century, is when really that all came to a head, culminated, and the beginning of the erosion of the colonial powers because look at what Germany did in Africa, along with what France did in Africa and the Sahel. Germany with its concentration camps down in southern Africa. The Dutch as well were involved. So, they're all, these Europeans were competing with each other over different colonies around the world. Then comes World War I. And that is the beginning of the collapse of the British Empire. The British Empire was global. It was the biggest. It was the most important. The sun, as they said, the sun never set on the British Empire. But the loss, the cost, physical cost, economic cost of World War I, coupled with the loss of so many, of an entire generation really of young men that they were no longer alive to reproduce, build families. They were gone, wiped out. That began this contraction, if you will, of the British Empire. And again, when World War II comes around, that's sort of the final, pull the pin, blow up the grenade, and blow up the colonialism. Because coming out of that, you then had the emergence of all these different independent movements. India gets its independence. Countries that had been under the control of Germans, that was taken away as a result, one of the consequences of losing the war. And we've seen ever since then, over the course of the last 80 years, the continued erosion and decline of Europe as both a military power, as an economic power, no longer really relevant. Center of the industry, nope, not at all. That's shifted. China's now that. How about their navies are just a shadow of what they used to be. Their armed forces, the Brits, they got like a total of 70,000. Hell, they can't even fill a soccer stadium with their entire military. So this kind of nonsense from Ursula, like, oh, we're going to be in control and dictate. Iran is now emerging as more powerful economic player by just controlling that Strait of Hormuz. Europe is going to be screaming for mercy within the next 2 to 3 weeks. Mark my words.
Yeah. Larry, before wrapping up, Zelensky came out and said Europe does need to start producing munitions in Europe, and together he's considering Ukraine as part of Europe. Sure. I don't know if they're going to be part of Europe, and if they're going to be a state called Ukraine as it was before the war started. Yeah. But how about the capability of production, military-industrial complex in Europe without energy? How is that possible?
Right. Yeah, no, that's the truth that they're going to have to come be confronted with. The global economic crisis that hit in 2008 was significant, but what lies before us right now, it dwarfs. What happened in 2008 could be viewed as a short, small rain shower. And what we're facing now is a hurricane of just devastating consequences. And people look at me and say, oh, you're crazy. That's, you're just exaggerating. Look, if you recall the images out of Thailand when they had the tsunamis, was that back in 2012? Yeah. People sitting on the beach, they're just sitting there and they see all the water running away. It moves out. Hey, look at this. It's calm. This is great. Look at all the beach. Hey, let's go out and inspect the fish. Look at, not realizing that was the sign that something terrible was getting ready to happen. That's what this last 7 weeks, now 8 weeks have been. The water running away. Because there is a tsunami that's coming in that will crush us economically. Everybody. It's not going to be just one country or two countries, but Europe is going to be one of the biggest ones to suffer because they're out of oil. And there is not another alternative. It's not like they can say, oh, we just have to go pay a higher price. No, the actual supplies are down. Now, the only thing that's going to make supplies come back, apart from opening the Strait of Hormuz, is if there's such an economic collapse that people stop driving, and that has its own terrible implications.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Larry, for being
Yeah,
with us today.
on that cheery note, let's start the week.
A stunning breach of American defenses. An Iranian F-5 fighter jet punches through the shield and strikes a major U.S. military base in Kuwait. In the early days of the war, Camp Buehring, long considered secure, was hit in a rare and shocking aerial attack, raising serious questions about U.S. air defense vulnerabilities in the region. According to an NBC report, the Iranian jet evaded advanced air defense systems and successfully dropped its payload on target. While interception systems were active, they failed to stop the incoming threat, marking one of the most significant breaches in recent years. But this was no isolated strike. Analysts say Iran launched a coordinated campaign across the Persian Gulf. The American Enterprise Institute estimates that more than 100 targets were hit across 11 bases in 7 countries, including Qatar, UAE, Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia. The damage? Extensive. Warehouses, aircraft hangars, radar installations, satellite systems, and runways were all impacted. Dozens of aircraft were reportedly damaged or destroyed. Repair costs alone could exceed $5 billion. Senior U.S. officials described the situation as severe. In Bahrain, the U.S. Navy's regional headquarters, critical for fleet operations, was heavily damaged. Other facilities across the region were also hit, though some may be recoverable. The human toll is also significant. 13 U.S. service members were killed, and up to 400 were wounded. While most have returned to duty, the scale of the attack has left a lasting impact. Despite this, the Pentagon has remained tight-lipped. Officials have declined to release full damage assessments, citing operational security. Even Congress, sources say, has not received detailed briefings. Meanwhile, the strain on U.S. military resources is becoming clear. A new analysis reveals that nearly half of America's precision-guided missile stockpile was used during just 7 weeks of conflict. This includes critical systems like THAAD and Patriot interceptors. Tomahawk cruise missiles, long-range strike weapons, and naval interceptors have also been heavily depleted. Experts warn it could take 4 to 5 years to fully rebuild these arsenals. A single jet slipping through defenses has exposed a much bigger story of vulnerability, cost, and a conflict that may have reshaped the balance of power in the region.
Hey everyone, I'm back for another report on the news on the Iran war. I am currently in transit in China, so you're seeing the hotel room here. But I wanted to begin with the bombshell report by CBS News, a deep investigation inside of the Pentagon, stating that during the active hostilities with Iran, Iran used a decades-old Iranian fighter jet, an F-5 fighter jet, to breach U.S. air defenses and strike a major Gulf military facility. Now, these early retaliatory strikes in the U.S.-Israeli aggression caused significantly more damage, according to this report, to U.S. military infrastructure than publicly acknowledged, with over 100 targets hit across bases in multiple Gulf countries. Now, in the opening phase of this, an Iranian F-5, which is a Cold War era aircraft produced in the 1950s, penetrated air defenses and struck Camp Buehring in Kuwait, despite the presence of advanced air defense systems. And you might remember the fighter jets that were, the F-15 fighter jets that were shot out of the air, claiming to be Kuwaiti air defenses. Many believe now it's Iranian. Now it might have been Iranian fighter jets that were actually flying over. So facilities including hangars, runways, radar installations, and command sites across Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, and the UAE were damaged in this process, with repairs now estimated to be in the billions of US dollars. So when we're talking about a decades-old fighter jet that can land a hit on the US military like this whole idea of US air defenses and the United States in general being untouchable and having air dominance has basically been burst asunder. That is now completely a myth. The F-5 was built in 1959. That's 67 years ago. And this just demonstrates and proves that the United States not only didn't have air dominance throughout this period before the ceasefire, but in fact, Iran's military response was not only decisive and devastating with missiles and drones, but also it used a wider array of weaponry at its disposal to create and wreak havoc on US military installations. So this is huge news because now we have Donald Trump having been targeted by another assassination attempt, another attempt at his life, which of course should be condemned because of what the consequences of that will bring. But at the same time, this could very well be opening a Pandora's box to blame Iran for an act like this and end up justifying further military aggression. But military aggression that the United States can't really wage and fight right now. There's a reason why this pause is happening, and this CBS report is a big indication as to why. The United States is having an incredibly difficult time not only keeping up its munitions and armaments. It has used up 50% of its Patriots, 50% of its THAAD interceptors, and a significant portion of its Tomahawk, offensive Tomahawk and Javelin missiles, leading to the United States having to get closer and closer into Iranian airspace with their F-15s, F-16s, F-35s, and leaving them vulnerable to Iranian air defenses, which over the last few days have been active. There have been reports that maybe it was just testing, that there wasn't actually active hostilities. Some Iranian reports say that there was drone activity happening in certain regions of Iran. But nonetheless, this is the big dilemma that the United States finds itself in. It can either restart hostilities or it can settle on terms favoring Iran, which the US has demonstrated it does not want to do. But also, the US has been playing a really strange game on the diplomatic front. Donald Trump has just canceled so-called peace talks that were supposed to happen in Islamabad not 24 hours ago. He said, I just canceled the trip of my representatives going to Islamabad, Pakistan to meet with Iranians. Too much time wasted on traveling, too much work. Besides which there is tremendous infighting and confusion within their leadership, meaning Iran's. Nobody knows who is in charge, including them. Also, we have all the cards. They have none. If they want to talk, all they have to do is call. That's a strange Truth Social post from a leader that is claiming to have all the cards. In fact, that CBS report demonstrates that, that Iran is the one with all the cards, that Iran is the one saying that it has the capabilities to defend itself and to continue on with even greater and more devastation in this war if the U.S. restarts, while the United States has been the one blowing smoke. The Donald Trump and his administration has said that the Iranian Navy is obliterated, yet you have dozens of fast attack speedboats ready to confront the U.S. Navy if the USS George W. Bush, or now the supposedly recuperated U.S. Gerald Ford, end up, or the USS Abraham Lincoln, all three aircraft carriers are now in the region. If they end up getting too close to Iranian anti-ship missiles, to Iranian drones and ballistic missiles, well, I guess we'll see if that Navy is actually obliterated after all. And of course, the Air Force, right? They claimed the entirety of the Iranian military, including its Air Force, has been obliterated, yet in the early period of this war, the Iranian Air Force, which was utilizing a very old aircraft, was still able to penetrate U.S. air defenses, which means that if Iran still has capabilities, which U.S. intelligence says it does, and Iran says it does, so we have to believe that Iran has significant capabilities still. Well, the United States' air defenses are completely and utterly unable to handle what is to come. Now, just look at this behavior by the United States, and you tell me if the U.S. is in a position to win this war or to complete any of its objectives, or to even restart this war anytime soon. Donald Trump first, this is just in one day, Donald Trump first asked Iran for direct talks and said that they were sending their officials to Islamabad. When there was an announcement that Iran was going to travel there as well, but Iran said they were going to go to Islamabad, to Muscat, and then to Moscow, that they weren't actually going to talk to the United States. But what did the U.S. do? They said, nope, direct talks are on and we're going. Then, not a couple minutes later, Iran says, we're not meeting with any U.S. officials in Islamabad. Sorry to tell you. Donald Trump, just several hours later, I'm canceling the Pakistani trip to meet Iranians. The U.S. has all the cards. Don't waste my time. Does this sound like a president, a leader, a government that knows what it's doing, that has a plan for this war? And even if there's an overall aim, an objective, which is to weaken Iran, destroy Iran, overthrow Iran's government, does it sound like the United States and its Israeli allies, which definitely quiet right now, right? The Israelis are striking Lebanon, breaking that ceasefire, trying to push the United States back into war. But other than this, they don't really have any other cards, and they're holding back, likely because the United States needs to resupply them with air defense interceptors, lest they become hit even harder when hostilities actually begin. So Donald Trump has said throughout all this, through these reports, these damning reports, several days now, U.S. intelligence, now CBS News investigation, have been publishing damning reports about this war. And Donald Trump's response and the United States' response has basically been to almost flow and run in parallel to them. He also said, in reaction to the press's questioning of his behavior in this war, he also said that he hasn't even thought about ending the Iran ceasefire. He hasn't even thought about restarting war, which Donald Trump's words can never really be trusted. No one in the United States administration on either side, no matter who it is, you can't really trust them. But I think this is an indication what Donald Trump really does is he kind of gives you everything, and you kind of have to choose what to believe. And here, what we can know is that the United States, despite its buildup, despite we've been seeing over the last 24 to 36 hours, we're seeing massive military cargo be transferred from Europe and other parts of the world into the Middle East, into the region. Iran has also said that Israel and the United States has built up to a greater degree than they had even prior to February 28th. But does that mean they'll restart hostilities? Doesn't necessarily mean that yet, because some have surmised, and I believe this could also be true, that this is a negotiation ploy for Donald Trump and for the United States, that they want to try to frighten Iran again, that, oh, we'll destroy more if you don't settle on terms that we are dictating. But Iran has said they will never accept surrender terms. They will never negotiate with the United States on the maximalist positions that the US has put forward. And of course, what are those positions? Get rid of all your ballistic missiles, get rid of your nuclear enrichment, get rid of everything. Basically, make yourself servile to the United States. Make yourself a country completely vulnerable to US and Israeli attack in the future. Make yourself vulnerable to the actual destruction of the Iranian government. So these are terms that Iran will never negotiate in because they don't have to. And furthermore, it is the United States that will eventually need to, or just settle on, without even coming to a peace treaty, terms favorable to Iran, because Iran has control of the Strait of Hormuz, and they will continue to exercise that control. And as I said in my prior video, that now that they've set the rules and terms for what control over the Strait of Hormuz looks like, well, what we are essentially looking at is Iran's checkmate, is that no matter what the United States does from here on out, that control will continue to feed the Iran, not the United States, they continue to feed Iran the necessary revenue it needs to rebuild its country, to develop itself, and to ensure that not only is it able to defend itself, but that it is moving forward on its own objectives, regardless of what the United States and Israel does. It's able to move forward as a stronger and even more independent country than it was before. Now being called the fourth global power in the world by many estimations, and the most important power in the Middle East, with control over the Strait of Hormuz, which is responsible for 20% of all oil flows, at least before February 28th. So, I mean, this is where we're at. The United States is now in hundreds, maybe tens of billions, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars worth of damage based on Iran's retaliation. We now know that Iran has a functioning air force, and it didn't even really have to use it. We don't even know the extent of how much it used its air force in this war, but we do now know that, given that it shot down the F-15 prior to the ceasefire, prior to that rescue mission, which was an obvious attempt to stage an operation to seize uranium right before this current ceasefire. But now that we know that they've shot down an F-15, they might have shot down at least a couple more if we could get verification of that earlier in the war. And now with CBS's investigation of this F-5, well, Iranian air defenses and its air force are obviously very much operable. And this is really bad news for the region, because Iran does not have to use its most advanced weaponry to fight against the United States. And this is where the US has been exposed as a paper tiger. This is where the United States has been essentially humiliated, where we have now data across the board that no matter how many hundreds of billions, now to 1.5 trillion US dollars, the US spends on its so-called defense, aka its war machine, a country like Iran, which spends a fraction of that, on its own military development, which has the capacity to build cheap drones and cheap ballistic missiles and even advanced hypersonic missiles underground, ready to strike at any time. Now that we know that this $1.5 trillion military machine can't defend itself against this Iranian military force, well, what does that portend for the rest of the world? What does that portend for the future of the US unipolar order? Because across the board in the US mainstream media, you'll find reports about how worrisome it is and how good it is for China, for Iran to be staging this kind of valiant defense of its homeland. Because for China, what is happening? The United States is taking THAADs from South Korea. It's stripping the Asia Pacific of any naval presence, which is critical, right? The US loves to sail destroyers. It loves to sail its aircraft carriers through the South China Sea, through even the Taiwan Straits at times. So without this naval presence, with it being completely bogged down and mired in West Asia, to supposedly intimidate Iran, to blockade Iran, we have reports that absolute, as Gen Zers would say, slop. They're eating garbage. They're sitting out in the Persian Gulf area, the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea. They're sitting out there hot, baking in this. Now we're getting to the hot season, as Professor Morandi has said on my show. It is going to be hell for them. We already know that the Gerald Ford was likely subjected to mutiny-like behavior before the February 28th strike. strikes, what's going to happen when the U.S. Marines and the various officers on that, and sailors, etc., on those naval aircraft carriers are baking in over 100, 110, 120 degrees Fahrenheit inside those destroyers? Will they want to stay there? Will they want to go home? Because the United States has already taken significant damage, and this has to be said. The morale couldn't be any lower for the US. And morale is not just a reflection of what's happening on the battlefield, because it's hard to gauge. We know that conscientious objector calls are surging, but it's not only this, it's general public opinion is often a reflection of how people feel on the battlefield when it comes to US wars. Mind you, my father went to Vietnam. He was deployed to Vietnam, drafted after the Tet Offensive, and US morale was in the tank at that time, post 1968. And he was there 69 to 71. And he told me that nobody wanted to be there. Everyone wanted to go home, that everyone was just trying to stay alive. And oftentimes the biggest issues came from drunken military officers to exhausted military officers. Their lives were more at risk from environmental conditions, their own behavior, than what was going on the battlefield, because they were just trying to avoid fighting. What in public opinion at that time of the Vietnam War was very low. You had a huge anti-war movement, and you had people screaming for an end to the draft and an end to the war. We have a similar situation, but of course, a little bit more muted here in the United States, where Donald Trump's public opinion ratings are in the tank. Nobody wants this war other than a tiny fraction of the population. Donald Trump's approval rating is barely 3 out of 10. It's hovering around 30 something odd percent. And across the board on economy, foreign policy, war, across all key indicators, trust in his administration, it is very low. J.D. Vance is polling at the most unpopular person in the administration. The lack of consistency, the inability to control the narrative and to deliver policy that actually benefits American people is destroying Donald Trump's administration. But it always does. It always does. This is how it works. The United States is an oligarchy. It is controlled by monopolists. It is controlled by bankers. It is controlled by the war machine, the military-industrial complex, and they're the ones who are pushing this Iran war further and further, despite all evidence that this is not going to go well. So Iran is planning to continue its diplomatic offensive. It is going to continue to talk with Pakistan and build what now is becoming a key diplomatic relationship independent of the United States. The US doesn't even have a third party that it can say is working on its terms, because remember, this is the US hegemon. The US hegemon is supposed to be dictating the terms. So even the mediators are supposed to be working on behalf of the United States. And that is not happening in this conflict. The US is becoming more and more isolated. Of course, Pakistan wants to see a full peace settlement, but not even they are pushing the Iranians to capitulate to the US surrender terms because they're unreasonable. And the writing's on the wall. If Iran surrenders to US terms in this way, well, what happens to the rest of the world? Well, that's a precedent. The rest of the world will now have to say, we might have to think about giving up a lot if we are going to avoid US strikes on us. And that's just not acceptable. So Iran is fighting for everybody, fighting for the whole world now. Now Iran's position, how it decides it's going to move in this war, determines the shape of military, political, and economic warfare for generations to come. That's how high the stakes are here. And it will affect Cuba. It'll affect Russia, China. It'll affect all of these flashpoints that the United States has in its sights. You know, Donald Trump has said he's going to stop by Cuba after Iran. Well, now Cuba has to look and say, they know what to do now. We have to fight the U.S. to a standstill. They don't have the military power that Iran has, but if they have the popular power to fight the U.S. to a standstill, the U.S. is going to have a hard time bombing a country that's 90 miles off of Florida. So Now Cuba has to look at this as, okay, if we have the political defiance and the political will, then we can withstand US pressure, and that's what we have to build. And the lessons now are there for everybody in the global south and everybody in the world, really. Really, this is a test and battle of fortitude. This was a test and battle of which order, which order in the world, in this rapidly shifting geopolitical and economic situation worldwide, which one has the resilience and the capacity to bounce back after facing major hits. And right now, contrary to what a lot of people were telling me, a lot of people who watch this show were very discouraged prior to February 28th, talking about the Axis of Resistance defeated. Venezuela was a blow. Syria 2024. We've had hits, Hezbollah ceasefire. We've had hits all across the global south, right? And there's a lot of pessimism about the future. Okay, China's not doing enough, Russia's not doing enough, Iran not doing enough. And now we see the truth. Now we see what the correct way of handling the contradictions and the problems set forth by the US empire are. That it does take a certain level of strategic patience. It does take a certain level of what Deng Xiaoping said was hide your strength and bide your time. It does take a certain level of making key strategic choices, which in the long run will benefit everybody, but in the short run may look like a temporary pause or what have you. But in the end, the multipolar world has actually been going on the offensive, and Iran has demonstrated through its defensive retaliatory strikes that this world order is in fact a lot stronger than it was made out to be. And that with three now major pillars, now that Iran has ascended as a pillar in the multipolar world, it has ascended into as a country that has the capacity to stand up to the US empire in an even bigger way than it was doing prior to February 28th. Well, now you have what Pepe Escobar has called the RIC, now the real RIC, Russia, Iran, and China, being a kind of triangle that can develop this multipolar world, especially in Eurasia, to such a significant degree. And it is giving the world hope that there is a new world that can emerge out of the destruction that the US empire is causing. But more destruction is to come. As friend of the show, Brian Berletic has said so many times, we cannot underestimate the capacity of the US empire to do damage. And it will go back to war with Iran. I've been joking with friends in, I guess, the kind of dark joke manner, dark humor manner, that the US is kind of on an every 6-month plan with war on Iran. And that could very well be the case here. Now, it could be the case that the US goes to war even sooner than 6 months. But it's more likely that the US has to take longer pauses to replenish and rebuild. And Iran will have to do the same. And now it's a matter of how long can each side go until one buckles. The global economy may be what buckles it all, what may bring down the US empire, because accumulated shocks like this, and of course, an indication of a new world ahead, right? A vision of a new world ahead will absolutely freak out. It already is freaking out the global financial elites and all of this. They may eventually have to put a longer pause on this as well, knowing that if they don't do that, then the new world that's emerging will accelerate. So this is the conundrum. This is the real problem. The US is really short of nuclear war, unable to dictate terms more and more so in the world, especially with this new triangle of the multipolar world, Russia, China, and Iran. And being in China over the last 2 weeks, I've got to say, there's absolutely no way to intimidate this country into submission. And if Iran cannot be defeated, forget about it to the US empire when it comes to China. China's already surpassed the capacity of the United States to overtake it, to destroy it, to overthrow it. That's not going to happen. The only thing that can happen from here is that the US empire tries to take down the rest of the world in hopes that that will take down China too. And it's a flawed strategy. And of course, it's one with very dangerous consequences. So that is the true situation in the world right now. I want to give you that update, given the reports about the US's military, its Navy, its Air Force, its air defense. It's all being exposed by Iran in an even deeper way than we had known before. These leaks are going to continue to come out, and we're going to see how the long-term effects of this war are going to shape out, even as it continues in a lower intensity manner. All right, everybody, that's all from
Reports this morning are that Iranian Foreign Minister Arachi has told the U.S. through the intermediaries in Islamabad, Pakistan, that the issue of Iran nuclear enrichment for civilian purposes is off the table and not subject to negotiation. If those reports are true, and we'll talk about President Putin and Foreign Minister Arachi in a minute, but if those reports are true, how do you expect the Americans will react?
Well, two things about that. One is that Trump has the option of saying, well, you know, we made the Iranians promise not to develop a nuclear weapon. Now, that will go over big in this country because most Americans don't know that the intelligence community has been saying since 2007 that the Iranians are not working on a nuclear weapon as opposed to nuclear enrichment, okay? Now, the latest is, if I remember correctly, that enrichment or the nuclear issue has not been said to be completely off the table. We'll do that later. We could talk about that later. First, we have to end the U.S. blockade of Iranian points. Then maybe we can talk to the Americans. But in the interim, we're talking with the Omanis. So we'll have a regulation of this strait no matter what. We're talking to the Russians, and we're not talking to the Americans until they lift that blockade. So the nuclear issue is a side issue, really. They're not working on a nuclear weapon. Trump knows that, but the American people don't know that. And as I've been saying for months now, the option for Trump is to say, oh, we have determined that they're not working on a nuclear weapon and that the IAEA and actually some U.S. inspectors are going to go back in there. The nuclear issue is resolved now. We'll take away the issue of the other things, and we'll talk about the strait and how about if the U.S. Eliminates the blockade on Iranian points, so we got a deal, and then we could talk more. But we're not going to talk until the U.S. lifts the blockade, and that's a reasonable situation. The Russians. Let me just say this about the Russians. They are in there with both feet. Why? Well, just look at the map, for God's sake, and look at the history of how Russia has always feared what could come from its soft underbelly. And I'll just say one more time, when the Iranians and the Russians were negotiating a mutual strategic treaty, it took them 3 years. And I inferred that, that's because the Iranians want a mutual defense treaty binding Russia to come to their aid if they get attacked. And I was wrong. It was the Russians. It was the Russians that were offering that and the Iranians that were turning them down. So this shows in its kind of indirect way how strategic the Russians look at Iran. They were willing to do the same kind of mutual defense treaty that they have with North Korea. The Iranians turned them down, and it became something less. As a token of how Russia feels about the soft underbelly, that's real, and they're not going to settle for anything short of a deal that meets their objectives as well as the Iranian objectives.
Let me segue for just a minute. Do you think that Trump recognizes that he has lost this war of aggression? By lost, I mean failed to achieve any of his stated military objectives?
It really depends on what they're telling him and who's telling him. Most people with their heads screwed on right know that. Is it likely that Rubio or Hegseth or even Vance are telling him that? I don't know. One would expect that they would jump off like rats off the sinking ship. The saving grace is that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Dan Kane, an Air Force four-star, but really just coming out of the Air Force National Guard, for God's sake, as a pilot, he impressed Trump at one point in 2018, and we have a personal representative who was there, watched what happened, and can tell us the whole story on how Trump really got to like Racing Kane. It's Tony Aguilar, Tony, the lieutenant colonel that won the Sam Adams Award just last January, he told me, I talked to him less than an hour ago. He said, look, Ray, I was there. I was with General Kane daily. And when President Trump came, I was there. And all these other generals, they were saying, oh, you want to get out of Syria? Sure, we can do that. Toot sweet. Yeah, we'll do it right away. And Kane said, sir, I know that you want to do this. There's a different way we can proceed and protect our own people, protect our own materiel. And so would I explain that to you? And Trump said, yeah, I'd like to hear that. And he did. Now, Trump listened to him, agreed with what he said, and it says, I see you, what you got that name Kane. What's your first name? And he says, it's Raisin. It's a raisin. You mean like a raisins that you eat? No. I'm a pilot. I'm a fighter pilot, for God's sake. I raise Kane. Oh, Trump really liked that. Before you know it, Raisin Kane appears at Andrews Air Force Base with a MAGA hat on. And that sealed the deal, okay? Now, what about Kane? He faced into one-on-one the president when all these other malleable generals saying, yes, sir, sure, we can do this. And he convinced them to do it in a right, phased way, saving lives, saving material. And Trump respected him for that. And it was Trump personally who picked Kane to come back in out of retirement, out of the reserve, with one more star to be his personal assistant. Now, what am I saying? I'm saying if Kane could do that once, and if we have a personal witness as to how that went on, and we do, Tony Aguilar, he could do it again. And that's the saving grace here. The armed invasion, the land invasion, well, as Larry points out, no big generals are involved in that, and that suggests that maybe CENTCOM is doing something sensible and not including a land invasion. However, the guy who replaced the chief of staff of the Army, Randy George, it used to be Hegseth's personal assistant, a 3-star, okay? And he is described as being former head of the 82nd Airborne. And he's a, yes, sir, we could do whatever you want. And so that's the other thing. So it's really up to whether Raisin Kane has the kind of conscience that can say, look, I did this before. I may get canned, but I'm going to do it again because this is a cockamamie attitude, landing troops. Or
how significant is it that I'm going back to Iran now and away from General Kane, that Foreign Minister Arachi met with President Putin himself?
Well, it is unusual, except for the Iranians. They have been given this kind of treatment before. Putin has met with Arachi before. So it was expected. Actually, Peskov said over the weekend, yeah, Putin's ready to greet him with open arms as soon as he arrives. And now he wasn't at the plane side, but as we see in the photos here, that he did talk to Putin. This is big. In other words, the Russians are saying, look, we're in this. We're going to support the Iranians. We give them all kinds of sophisticated intelligence that you guys are giving to the Ukrainians, okay? Karma. And so, look, we're in bed with them, and so is China. Come to your senses. Don't escalate here. Try to work out some kind of deal. Now, Trump keeps harping on no nuclear weapon. That's pushing on an open door, for God's sake. And the saving grace is how ignorant the American people are, because if Trump was saying we prevented him from working on a nuclear weapon, the American people don't know that they stopped working on a nuclear weapon in 2003, and every intelligence assessment since then annually has said the same thing, that they stopped working on a nuclear weapon. There's a religious edict about it, and actually this year they didn't say that, did they? No. They didn't say that there was an imminent threat.
That's because Trump didn't want to hear it. When Tulsi Gabbard testified under oath that 18 American intelligence agencies agreed on one thing, and that was Iran was not building a nuclear weapon since the early 2000s, whether it's 2, 3, or 5. Trump simply said, I don't care what she said. I believe the otherwise. He believes what Mossad told him, whether it's true or not. He's not interested in truth. He's interested in what will advance the argument for war. The statement was made a few months ago. What do you think Arachi is discussing with President Putin?
They're discussing the negotiating tactics that are in play here. Arachi has a lot of explaining to do. We not only embarrassed, we humiliated Trump. He wanted to send his two little boys there, the dynamic duo of Witkoff and Kushner, and they were almost getting on the plane when Arachi made it clear, look, sure, they could come visit with the Pakistanis, but I'm not going to be there. I'm going off to Oman to talk to them about the Strait, and then I'm going to Moscow. I'm not going to deal with these guys anymore. Forget about it. So that was a big embarrassment. Trump, in his later remarks yesterday, said, well, I'm very conscious of the cost of fuel and sending those big planes all the way to Pakistan, 11 hours, we're not going to do that. It may not be worth the effort. So things are at least quiet now. And of course, the fly in the ointment is Israel. And we have that defense minister
hold off on Israel for a minute. We're going to play what Israel Katz said. But before that, here is Foreign Minister Arachi after meeting with President Putin.
We have always had close consultations with Russia on a wide range of issues, especially all regional and international matters. And of course, in bilateral relations as well, there have always been many topics discussed. In any case, during the negotiations, it became clear that the American approach in the previous round of talks, therefore the assumptions that had been made before were mostly aimed at achieving half the intended goal. Mistakes that were made and the wrong approaches that were taken required a final review. We needed to have detailed discussions with our friends in Pakistan. That was the purpose of the trip. We thoroughly reviewed what had happened in the past and discussed under what conditions we could continue the negotiations. In fact, the conditions are those of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Core of what he said, the audio wasn't that great, although Chris removed a tremendous amount of background noise. They were in a hallway in an airport. Incorrect approaches and excessive demands by the U.S. caused the previous round of talks, despite progress, not to reach its objectives. Your thoughts?
Well, the last round, when the vice president was involved, we know that he was constantly required to answer the phone from the White House and another phone from Netanyahu. We know that Netanyahu was giving him instructions as well as the White House. Maybe they were comparing notes, but we also know that Vance said, I gave Netanyahu a full report when I got back on the plane, and Netanyahu, for his point, said, well, yeah, we got a really nice report from the vice president. We get a report from the Americans every day. Well, hello. And then here we have the defense minister, as you're going to point out, I guess, saying, look, we just need a green light from the Americans.
Here he is. This is a little off the wall and fanatical, but here he is, Israel Katz, the Israeli defense minister.
Israel is prepared for the renewal of war against Iran. The IDF is ready both defensively and offensively, and the targets have been marked. They are waiting for a green light from the United States first and foremost in order to complete the elimination of the Khamenei dynasty, the initiator of the annihilation plan against Israel, and the successors of the Iranian terror regime's leadership. In addition, the goal is to return Iran to the age of darkness and stone by blowing up the main energy and electricity facilities and crushing the national economic infrastructure. The terror regime in Iran specializes mainly in the internal suppression of the population through the Revolutionary Guards and the Basij, as well as in energy blackmail by threatening to inflame global oil prices. It is down for the count. Its leaders are hiding in tunnels and are struggling to communicate and make decisions. Its skies are wide open, and all its national infrastructure and strategic facilities are exposed to attacks. Yet it declares that it is winning, because just like Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza, it does not care about the heavy price paid by the population. The main thing is personal survival, which is not guaranteed either. When the attack resumes this time, it will be different and deadly and will deliver devastating blows to the most sensitive places. This will be in addition to the massive blows that the Iranian terror regime has already suffered so far, which will shake and collapse its very foundations.
And collapse its very foundations. What will these people in Tel Aviv do if Trump does enter into an agreement that provides for no military attacks in the long term?
Well, even if they fear that's going to happen, they will launch a false flag attack. Maybe they'll try to sink a carrier or one of the accompanying ships there, and they blame it on Iran. In other words, Trump is between a rock and a hard place. He's faced with the decision, is he really going to put America first this time, or is he going to let Netanyahu rope him into war, as our Secretary of State Rubio admits happened on the 28th of February, when he announced that the Israelis said they're just about to attack, and we were afraid that the Iranians would retaliate against us, and so we had to move against them. We had to go against them with a preemptive attack against Iran, so that our casualties would be less when try to parse that thing. Israelis are driving this thing. Will they do it again? I don't know. I think that Trump is getting some good advice finally from people who say there's no end to this thing, and you can declare victory if you're artful enough. Probably the Iranians will say, oh yeah, we'll talk about enrichment later, okay? And it can be persuasive, and you can get the strait open. Now, as I said before, the Israelis are the fly in the ointment. There you had a really good example of Katz impersonating Goebbels or his master.
Yeah. Well, what do you think Trump will do? I think Trump is trapped. I don't think he has any way out of this that is face saving. I think he's created a monster that's now going to consume him politically.
That's a safe bet, Judge, but the Iranians are very clever. So are the Russians. They don't want this thing to go sky high again. There are ways that this can be negotiated, I feel sure. It won't be as good as the JCPOA, the Iran deal under Obama, but it can be masqueraded as just as good or even better. And as I say, the key is the media. The American people can be brought to believe anything if they finally see this damn war is going to be over and the price of gas will get below $4 a gallon. And actually, they're paying $108 for Brent crude just this morning. So things are going to get really bad if there's no agreement. The strait's not going to be open. It'll get worse and worse. We do have the midterms coming up. And what bothers me is, doesn't Trump care about the midterms? Doesn't he care enough not to insult the Pope and lose the Catholic vote? He might have some other ideas about the midterms. I just look what some of his advisors are saying about ICE and using these warehouses and so forth. His advisors, not just pundits. So I'm afraid that Trump has lost it in terms of trying to plan for a way out of the midterms other than suppressing them in a way that would be unique in American history.
Ray McGovern, thank you very much, my dear friend. Great analysis as always. We'll look
Could I plug a little book?
Oh yeah,
Judge?
go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, David Swanson, one of the brightest guys around, has written a book assembling General Smedley Butler's dicta. When he said war is a racket. Title of the book is War is Still a Racket. And the interesting thing on what I wrote in a blurb about it was Smedley Butler in the 30s decried the use of the National Guard to assemble protesters, put them in pens, lock them up, okay? He decried that in the 30s, and I'm afraid that it would have application now because, as I said before, I think Trump and his advisors are trying to figure out how we can handle the midterms, and I think there may be an equal chance that midterms will be handled as Trump wants, not as the American people want.
For those who don't know who General Smedley Butler was, he was the most decorated Marine Corps general in American history, well known for condemning war and referring to war as a racket. Well, thanks for reminding us of this book, Ray. We'll see you with Larry on Friday. All the best.
Looking forward to it.
Sure. Thank you.
It started getting noisy. Tables getting flipped over, guys running in with guns, and they were screaming, "Get down!" I didn't get down. It was fucking awesome. I literally took every minute of it in, and it was a pretty crazy, unique experience.
This whole thing is just a show, isn't it? Welcome to the fakest and gayest timeline of all time. With full respect to the gays, nothing against you guys. I'm sure you've probably all heard by now a suspect armed with knives and guns tried to storm the White House Correspondents' Dinner last night, just as Israeli-born mentalist Oz Perlman was performing on stage for Donald Trump. Perhaps his greatest illusion to date, if you catch my drift. But anyways, as you can see, I am not in my normal setup right now. I had to create this makeshift studio to talk to you guys today because, wow, I think we are live witnessing the Hollywoodification, okay? I'm calling it that, Hollywoodification of DC in real time, okay? The New York Times reports that the White House Correspondents' Dinner held to celebrate press freedom quickly descended into panic on Saturday evening when a man carrying multiple weapons charged past a security checkpoint at the Washington Hilton and exchanged fire with law enforcement officials before taken into custody. The suspect was identified as Cole Thomas Allen, 31, of Torrance, California, by law enforcement officials who spoke on the condition of anonymity to disclose the information. Under normal times, I think this would be a moment of solemn reflection for the nation, right? Where are we as a people that someone would be driven to do something so heinous as to kill or try to kill the president of the United States? But alas, we are not in normal times. So immediately people started doing some noticing, shall we say. For example, search spikes for a Cole Thomas Allen popping up in a certain country in the Middle East that happens to be our greatest ally in the days leading up to Saturday evening. Quite bizarre, quite peculiar that they always have a heads up, don't you think? And then this image of the shooter started to circulate on social media of him wearing what it looks like to be an Israeli Defense Forces, an IDF shirt. Is it real? I don't know, to be honest with you. Some are saying it's real, some are saying it's not real, and I think with AI deepfakes, everything should be on the table. Grok does say that the image supposedly came from his now deleted Instagram. We have been talking quite a bit about AI hallucinations lately, so I would definitely take that with a grain of salt. But speaking of AI hallucinations, take a look at this video post by Benny Johnson saying that, quote, "This was an armed attack by a Democrat with the intention of killing the elected president with a deadly weapon. This attack is worse than every single thing that happened on January 6, 2021 combined. The media will never tell you this, but it's true." But let's roll tape and see if you guys notice anything weird. I mean, okay, there's so many things wrong with this, starting with CapCut AI in the upper left-hand corner here. And then you can see the guy coming in holding what it looks like some kind of white poster. And then he's coming, and then it just disappears from the screen. Let's go again. What are we doing here, guys? Like, please, if we're going to do propaganda, it would be nice if you put a little bit more effort into it. Oh, but the weirdness continues. As it turns out, Cole Allen went to Caltech and worked at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Yes, he worked at JPL, and I would say that is very interesting timing given all the UFO stories that have been circulating around. So cue the conspiracy theorists on this one. Seriously, it's starting to look like this is all just one big show and they're just toying with everyone at this point.
Ready to rumble, is he not?
He is ready to rumble. I will tell you, this speech tonight will be classic Donald J. Trump. It'll be funny. It'll be entertaining. There will be some shots fired tonight in the room.
I know. It's a euphemism. Shots fired doesn't actually mean shots fired. So nothing to see here at all. Except take a listen to what this Fox News correspondent had to say right after the event.
I was sitting next to Caroline Levitt, the press secretary's husband. He was one of our guests. He was seated right next to me. And, right as the dinner was starting, the national anthem happened. And then he kind of leaned over and said, I watched you on TV, you do a great job. You need to be very safe. And he was just very serious when he said that to me. And he kind of looked around the room and he said, there are some.
Sounds like we lost Aisha's phone there. And
there was some what? What was she about to say? I mean, what a convenient time for the call to drop is, I guess, what we're left with. This, by the way, was Trump's first time attending the White House Correspondents' Dinner in a long time. Actually, the first time as president. And CNN's Brian Stelter had this article just a few hours before the event saying to expect the unexpected. I mean, that's a nice scoop right there, Brian. And then there were the reactions from the high-profile attendees, like one Erica Kirk.
I just want to go find Suzanne.
Right as she goes by the camera, I just want to go home. I would say that's good acting, but it's really not. And if it was real, that's also a little concerning, given she seems way more upset about this than when her husband was, publicly executed. And then there was Dana White's reaction. Let's play it.
It started getting noisy. Tables getting flipped over, guys running in with guns, and they were screaming, "Get down!" I didn't get down. It was fucking awesome. I literally took every minute of it in, and it was a pretty crazy, unique experience.
This whole thing is just a show, isn't it? But maybe the most ridiculous thing to come out of last night perhaps has to be this mass influencer campaign saying this is why Trump needs a new ballroom.
I didn't want to say this, but this is why we have to have all of the attributes of what we're planning at the White House. It's actually a larger room and it's much more secure. It's drone proof, it's bulletproof glass. We need the ballroom. That's why Secret Service, that's why the military are demanding it. They've wanted the ballroom for 150 years for lots of different reasons, but today's a little bit different because today we need levels of security that probably nobody's ever seen before.
Oh, is that right? I didn't want to say this, but the military has been wanting this ballroom for 150 years, and that's why we have to have it now. Beyond parody at this point. Now, the full manifesto of the alleged gunman Cole Allen was published a couple hours ago by the New York Post. I won't read the whole thing. You can Google it if you want. But there's a section in here that I find to be quite peculiar that I want to point out in where he lambasts security at the event. He says, quote, "No damn security, not in transport, not in the hotel, not in the event. Like, the one thing that I immediately noticed walking into the hotel is the sense of arrogance. I walk in with multiple weapons and not a single person there considers the possibility that I could be a threat. The security at the event is all outside, focused on protesters and current arrivals because apparently no one thought about what happens if someone checks in the day before. Like, this level of incompetence is insane, and I very sincerely hope it's corrected by the time this country gets actually competent leadership again. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but does it not seem a little weird that he's commenting on the security of the event? Was he like in the lobby writing this manifesto before he charged the security? It's almost like this was just about getting the ballroom. You know what I mean? Or maybe it was this A++ comment that I have to shout out. Sir, your ratings regarding this war and overall approval are dropping even lower. What should we do? Shoot me again. That's pretty good. Probably a non-zero chance that it might be one of these two reasons why this incident occurred. Now, I do want to end by addressing the conspiratorial nature of this report, or specifically the private feedback that I've been getting of how could you engage in this crazy conspiracy in a time like this? And I just want to say my rebuttal to that is, yes, it is crazy to say this, but we kind of live in crazy times. And at this point, it almost kind of doesn't matter whether or not this was a real assassination attempt or not, because the response is what matters, right? Trump isn't talking about healing this country. He's not really talking about, he's not reflecting on how the government can do better to serve its citizens. Rather, he and his influencers, all they can talk about is building this new ballroom and how we need to pass laws to surveil everybody after this, right? That's what the conspiracy theorists, the quote unquote conspiracy theorists, are worried about. The government doing these alleged false flags to justify ushering in more draconian laws. So I would say, think about it in this context, right? If the outcome is the same regardless, if they're just going to do all these things that they want to do, then the event itself being real or staged sort of becomes a point of irrelevance. But hey, that's just what I think. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below, right? Was this a real threat on the president's life, or was it just central casting?
Coffee. Follow me.